This is one of the most important books I have read in the last 10 years, and it's the kind of book I expect to keep reading every year.
And you'll understand it better each time.
No.
This is not an aberration. This is part of a long history of how Israelis and Palestinians have dealt with one another.
Do you think it was a genocide, by the way?
I'm not an expert on this, and my view
You have to
on
be an
whether
expert to have a view on this? Yeah.
Well, I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, but I do.
Okay.
But two things.
You're a lawyer.
From the Palestinian point of view, it was about justice, redemption, return, liberation, which is hard to reconcile with the existence of a Jewish state.
What do you say to somebody who says, this is the problem? Israelis just don't want to be killed by Palestinians. Palestinians want to uninvent Israel.
No Israeli government accepted full withdrawal from all of the West Bank and Gaza. No Israeli government accepted full withdrawal from East Jerusalem. No Israeli government agreed that there would be a genuine, meaningful sovereign state.
You say October 7th was Palestinian to the core.
When you've lived under the conditions that they've lived in, when they feel like they have been dispossessed, killed, humiliated, at that point, then maybe you would have a taste for revenge.
Please join me in welcoming Rob Malley. So, Rob, you know, we could start by talking about the news, but one of my ambitions for this series is for us to really get at deeper issues. I don't want this to just be an artifact of its time. I want this to be something that people could look at in 2 years, 3 years, 10 years, and kind of understand something both about how you view the conflict and about the conflict itself. So I thought we would start actually with your origin story. So in this book, you say that the first time you met a Palestinian, you were 17 years old. And that Palestinian was Yasser Arafat. So how did that happen?
So first, thank you all for showing up, and thanks for having me. This is a great series. I tell that story mainly in order to illustrate a point that I'll make in a second. But yes, this was, I think it was a little older than 17. I was a student at that inferior university that you referred to. And my father, who knew Arafat very well, was traveling with us, summer vacation, I guess, in Algeria. And we were having dinner with a friend of his, and all of a sudden, security detail barges in. In walks Arafat, and we proceed to have dinner with him for the next 2 hours.
Wait, but you got to, like, why is your father somebody who can...
Oh, you want all the story? Okay.
Yeah.
You have to read the book. I have to leave something for their appetite. My father was an Egyptian Jew who had grown up in Egypt, but was always sort of an outsider wherever he was. A Jew in Egypt, that's already an interesting beginning. A Jew who's an anti-Zionist and Arab nationalist, that complicates the picture even more, who moves to the US and is a vehement opponent of US foreign policy, in particular towards the Arab world, then moves to France, where he is not only a vehement opponent of French policy in the Third World, but he gets expelled. As an American journalist, that's not very common. So he was always a Palestinian or pro-Palestinian Arab nationalist, and in that capacity, as a journalist, but his own view of journalism, which was a very militant form of journalism, he was very close to the Palestinian national movement, to the PLO, and to Arafat in particular. And so that's why, yes, that was the background to that dinner. The dinner was not memorable other than for the fact that this man walked in because he spoke Arabic for 2 hours and I didn't speak a word of Arabic, so I can't tell you anything that he said. As he left us, he said, "I'm sorry, I wish I had known that you didn't speak Arabic. Next time we meet, we'll do this in English." And the next time is 30 years later. I'm then sitting next to President Clinton, and Arafat is the representative of the president of the head of the PLO and president of the Palestinian Authority. I don't know what he was thinking at the time. How did this guy end up, one in Algeria and then at the White House? But I tell the story not simply because it's somewhat amusing, but to draw a distinction about my background and the background of others who were on the peace team, because when I met him the second time, I was a part of the U.S. peace team led by Dennis Ross. And I think most of my colleagues who became friends had a slightly different pathway to this conflict, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, me, the first Palestinian or Israeli I ever met was Yasser Arafat. I'd not met an Israeli before, I'd not met a Palestinian before. I don't think that was true of my colleagues, and I think their entry point was, I mean, all but one were Jewish, and all of and I think they had all been introduced to the conflict through that lens, through that prism, and my prism through my father and through other things was quite different, which I think explains to some extent our different perspectives on the conflict.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, the other member of the negotiating team who I think also had a slightly different background was an Egyptian Copt.
Gamal Halal,
Yeah.
who some of us knew very well, and a wonderful and extraordinary human being, and he also had, I mean, he had a very different perspective from mine.
Yeah.
Egyptian Copt, that already introduces a difference, but an American, obviously,
Yeah.
and he had, both of us were often on the same side in whatever debates we would have
Yeah.
with the rest of the team.
Yeah, but there's something great about that's revealed about America in that fact that you had such a very diverse American negotiating team that was trying to make peace between the Israelis and the Palestinians. And one might wonder why, you would almost think like this country that could absorb Arabs and Jews, et cetera, like it is, if any country could make peace between these two people, it would be this one. And the fact that it hasn't been able to.
And some would quibble with your view that it was a very diverse team, but we could get into that later.
All right, fair enough. Okay.
Or how diverse it was.
What does the title mean? Tomorrow is yesterday.
So it means what it says. I mean, it means that what we're living between Israelis and Palestinians, in particular, since October 7th, after, is nothing new. And that everything...
That means today is yesterday. You're saying tomorrow is yesterday.
And tomorrow will be yesterday because everything that we're seeing, the dynamics between Israelis and Palestinians, are a throwback to the past. From Palestinian attitudes, and we could get into them, to Israeli attitudes, and we get into those, to American behavior. I mean, let's put Trump aside. That may be somewhat a different variable. Even the language. I mean, some of the language, and I'm a bit older than you, but those of us of a certain generation, when we hear Zionism is racism, settler colonialism, genocide, Holocaust, all of those is a vernacular that speaks to us from decades past. And so part of the theme of the book, which the title says two things. First, for those who say, after October 7th, and this was kind of the impetus for the book, it's because you have this extreme right-wing Israeli government, Netanyahu, Ben-Gvir, and Smotrich on the one hand. That's why you have the slaughter taking place in Gaza. Or October 7th is uniquely Islamist, uniquely Hamas. And almost as if these were two forces that came from a different planet, right? You had the Islamist radicals and the right-wing Israeli radicals, as if this was an aberration. Part of the message of the book is, this is not an aberration. This is not a one-off. This is part of a long history of how Israelis and Palestinians have dealt with one another. And again, we could get into why we view what so many viewed as sort of this unique break in the relationship between the two as a structural continuation. And the second reason, the second theme is that, or the second reason we wanted to call it that is, we've had now roughly 30 more years of an American-led peace process, right? And if after those 30 years, this is where we are, with the same vocabulary, the same behaviors, the same hostility between Israelis and Palestinians, then what does it say about those years that it was sort of light as air, evanescent, and that tomorrow's yesterday, everything that we're seeing today was true in decades past? And that's sort of an indictment of the years of peace processing, which didn't change much, if anything, in that relationship. And then there's so many elements, and for those who are familiar with the history of Palestinians, the history of Israel, there's so many elements today that we're seeing that are, again, reminiscent of a throwback to the past. Palestinians who are leaderless, adrift, who don't have a vision of what to do other than to stay on the land and resist. Israelis who feel, many of them, after October 7th, they were threatened in their existence, whether one agrees with that assessment or not. And Israelis and Palestinians having not even the beginning of a common vision of the future. All of that, again, is reminiscent of the past. And so, yes, tomorrow's yesterday.
So in the book, you lay out the problem this way. You say, the Israelis want normalcy, they want acceptance, they want security. And the Palestinians want justice and redemption. Can you explain, are these two things mutually exclusive?
So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. What we try to illustrate in the book is how they could not fit in the narrow confines of the two-state solution as habitually defined since Oslo, right? A hard partition between two states that what Israelis call their desire for absolute security is hard to distinguish from absolute domination and supremacy, which is hard to reconcile with a sovereign, meaningful Palestinian state, right? And a Palestinian perspective, which is...
Why is that? Because in your view, a meaningfully sovereign Palestinian state
Not in my
would
view.
have to have weapons?
I mean, means of self-defense, autonomy, decision-making power.
Yeah.
Hard to imagine that consistent with what is a sort of largely shared view among Israelis about what their security entails.
Yeah, okay.
And we see it every day. I mean, their security entails today, disappearance of Hamas, fully disarming Gaza, same in the West Bank. From the Palestinian point of view, what did they view the peace process was about? It was about, to some extent, justice, redemption, as you say, return, liberation, which is hard to reconcile with the existence of a Jewish state in the land that they consider to be theirs. I mean, so part of the Oslo process was trying to overlook that basic difference rather than try to see, is there a way to reconcile?
Yeah.
Because, it was sort of, let's not talk about history, let's not talk about these emotions, let's just think about where's the line that we're going to draw in the West Bank that's going to do the best to reconcile the two sides.
So this was the part of the book that I really found, I mean, it's a big part of the book, but that I really found challenging. Because
challenging in a good way.
It's all great. What do you say to somebody who says, look, Rob Malley, you have accurately identified the problem. This is the problem. Israelis just don't want to be killed by Palestinians. Palestinians want to uninvent Israel.
So I mean...
No, because you say return, national liberation. Like, what does that mean? Like, all of the things that you enumerate, it's the uninvention of Israel. Basically, Palestinians want a do-over. In your account, this is not Tarek Masoud's account.
No, I don't think that's because I think what Palestinians, their aspiration. I mean, people have aspirations all the time. It doesn't mean that they don't accept and live with something that's less than their aspiration, but they want to see their aspiration at least taken into account. So
how do you take in an aspiration to have no Jewish state in a two-state solution that's going to result in a Jewish state?
What I'm saying is that it's hard for them, it's hard for the Palestinian. If you're saying to a Palestinian, here's what you need to accept, it's going to be a hard thing for them to say, we're going to accept that our desire for return, right, which is enshrined in some Security Council resolutions or whatever, that desire is going to have to be ignored, and to tell the Israelis not just their desire, by the way, for full security, but for their attachment for all of the land, because what you're saying, you gave more of half the story, or less only half the story. For many Israelis, as we say in the book, the Zionist movement is not about Israel in the borders of '67. Talk to many Israelis and they would say, let me finish this.
Yeah, okay.
Many Israelis would say, we have greater attachment to Hebron than to Tel Aviv, right?
Yes.
And so so the message of the book is not, Palestinians will only be happy if there's no Israel, or Israelis will only be happy if there's no Palestinians, but that if you don't try to find a way to address the historical yearning of Palestinians, and there's some ideas at the end of the book, their yearning, which is for more than simply a state in the borders of '67 where you ignore the refugees and you ignore what happened in '48, or you tell the Israelis, you're going to have your state, but by the way, you can't live anywhere on the other side of the Green Line. That doesn't speak to them. I mean, neither October 7th nor the slaughter that followed was fought by people who were fighting over where's the line going to be in the West Bank. That's not what was motivating them. That's not what they were killing and dying for. They're killing and dying for something that's much more profound, emotional, historic. I mean, if what you're saying is, given those aspirations, there's no way for the Palestinians to agree to anything but the disappearance of Israel, I'd say, and again, we tell the story in the book, take a page from the Northern Ireland conflict, right? They didn't, one didn't get full satisfaction.
Yeah.
But each side felt that their dream stayed alive, right? Protestants and Catholics felt our dream is still alive. We haven't given up. There's a possibility that what we're hoping for and yearning for will still be addressed. And so when it comes to Israelis and Palestinians, our message is, as that was constituted, and if you want to push back, you have to tell me in what way what I'm saying is inaccurate. But the two-state solution was too narrow an outcome to fit the breadth and wealth of Palestinian and Israeli fears and aspirations. Does it mean that there's not another construct in which Jews feel, the Zionists feel that they have a right to self-determination, and Palestinians feel that they have a right to self-determination? I would say there is, but it's not what we've been trying to do for the last 30 years.
So first of all, there is not anything with respect to this conflict that Tarek Masoud is going to tell Rob Malley he's inaccurate.
No, go ahead.
Because what you've forgotten about it, I haven't even learned yet. So let's just establish that at the outset. But I guess what I'm trying to get you to reflect on or help me come to terms with is it does feel like there's an asymmetry here. Like you just pointed out that for many Zionists, they have a deep connection and a deep aspiration to the whole of the land between the river and the sea. I mean, you often will hear that that's in the Likud charter. And yet they show up to American brokered negotiations and they give up on those things. You in your discussion of Camp David, you talk about Barak giving up on a lot of stuff that people didn't expect. Last week we had Ehud Olmert here, gives up the entire West Bank. Ehud Olmert said, when I was giving up parts of East Jerusalem that aren't even Jewish, that have no connection to Judaism, I felt like I was fainting. Okay, but he did it. And in this account, on your account of the Palestinians, is they never do anything equivalent.
So again, I'm not here to write a brief for the Palestinians. I think we're trying to be as
I want to write the brief for the Palestinians, so I need you to help me. Yeah.
No, but the Palestinians agreed to the two-state solution. Yes, Arafat agreed to the two-state solution. He agreed to 22% of mandatory historic Palestine. He considered that to be the mother of all concessions, which was extremely difficult for the Palestinians to accept. No Israeli government, even Ehud Olmert, accepted that. No Israeli government accepted full withdrawal from all of the West Bank and Gaza. No Israeli government. No Israeli government accepted full withdrawal from East Jerusalem. No Israeli government agreed that there'd be what I would consider, what you would consider, I think most people here would consider a genuine, meaningful sovereign state. Now, there's some states that agree to give up on an army, but a state that has no means of self-defense, it doesn't control its borders, that's hard. It's hard to accept. And yes, the Palestinians have asked for, but it's always been a challenge, even for them, as we say in the book, to define how they could satisfy the rights of the refugees while respecting the existence of Israel. And, talking to those of you who have spoken to Palestinian officials, they will recognize that they don't quite know how to do that. They feel there needs to be a way. And there's some ideas that we could talk about later. But, I could push back and say the Palestinians, if Ehud Olmert or Ehud Barak had come in 2000 and said, okay, we're going to withdraw from all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, you could have a sovereign state, you could have your capital in all of East Jerusalem, I'm not sure that Arafat would have said no. But that's the counterfactual, we don't know. Yeah. Even in the way you present it, I'm not going after Tarek here, but the Israelis were generous. They agreed to give up Jerusalem. You
presented it that way, not me.
No, I never would use the word generous. I find that whole framing to be, obviously it's dismissive of the Palestinians, that one side is generous. It's like it's theirs and we're giving it away. Now, from an Israeli perspective, absolutely they think it's generous because they believe that the major concession they're making is to give any land back, or any land, not back, any land to the Palestinians, because they won. They won in 48 against Palestinians who denied the right to exist. They won in 67. And so I get it from an Israeli perspective. Their view is, stop coming after us. We're the ones, when in the history of the world has a party that's been attacked by another that denies their existence, said, okay, out of the goodness of our heart, we're going to give you territory. So that's their view. But from a Palestinian perspective, the original sin is not their rejection of 1948. It's the creation of of Israel. That's the original sin. And so it's not a matter of Israelis being generous. They can consider that they're far more generous by conceding 78% of what they consider to be legitimately theirs. So I'm not trying here to referee between the two, but I think your take, which is, if you listen to me, it sounds like I'm saying the Palestinians reject everything and the Israelis are putting things on the table. That's a certain framing, which I'm not saying you're adopting, but at least you're
I'm
reflecting
saying that
here.
Somebody who has that framing would find a lot of support in Rob Malley's book.
And people who have a different framing as well, which is why, I mean, I've had some Palestinians who think this reflects how they feel, and Israelis who say the same. And, maybe that's part of...
What about a slightly, another impression that somebody might get of your account, which is that the Israelis seem to be much more rooted in reality than the Palestinians. Like, again, in your account...
Because they're stronger and they won, yeah.
Right, and so, help me understand why Americans should invest in the Palestinian cause when the Palestinians are not being realistic about what is possible for them to achieve. They're denying the reality, which is that the state of Israel is, it's powerful. It's not going anywhere. They may not like it, but we don't like gravity either, and we have to deal with it. So why would somebody who reads this and says there's a degree of fancy on the Palestinian side that has rendered at least its negotiating position like unserious?
There's a lot to unpack there. If what you're saying is there's an asymmetry of power that has been made even more asymmetrical by the support that the greatest superpower on earth has provided to the greater party, the more powerful party of the two, yes, I agree. I mean, there is
But why aren't they willing to deal with that reality?
But what does that mean?
Like, it means
surrender.
Like this is the best deal. Surrender? Is it surrender in your view to accept
That's not my view.
State of your own?
I mean, you could. So why shouldn't they accept? I mean, again, I'm not. You're pushing me to try to.
This is Tarek, the student of Rob, and I'm just asking you to teach me. So
I'm going to grade you at the end.
Okay.
But
yes. I'll do a course eval. Go ahead.
Okay, then no, I won't grade you. You get an A. I mean, by that logic, right? Yeah. The Israelis could say, we're going to give you 10% of the West Bank. You're going to live in Bantustans. And by the way, that may well be the outcome. Mm-hmm. And why shouldn't the Palestinians accept it? Because they don't have the only power they have is the power that they are on the land. They believe they're on the land, steadfast, and they could say no, right? And every now and then could try to inflict pain and violence against the Israelis. But I mean, I'm not sure where to go with that argument that one side is stronger. No doubt, and have the Palestinians, if they look back today and say, should we have accepted 48?
Yeah.
Maybe. Well, I mean, if compared to where they are today, should they have accepted Camp David? That's harder because there's not really an offer at Camp David. We could get into that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, many parties, when they look back at what they thought was the just position, they say, well, we're weaker, so maybe we should have accepted less. But, I mean, you're a student of history. Dignity, pride, emotions, feelings of national self-determination matter. You don't simply say we're weaker, and therefore we're going to give everything up. And so, if you're asking me, I'm not going to sit in judgment and say they should have accepted, they shouldn't have accepted. I'm trying to explain their perspective, which I think is often ignored, less so today on campuses, but often ignored by what you described as a diverse American peacemaking team. I don't think it was that diverse in terms of understanding why a Palestinian may not react as enthusiastically to what you consider to be, and not you, but people would consider to be a generous offer. Yeah. If they think that, and again, it's just a clash. What we try to say is that Oslo there's a major discrepancy of narratives, right? I mean, the Israelis believe that the original sin was Palestinian rejection of 1948. The Palestinians think that it was the partition plan, which took away, the majority of their land. Yeah. Was Oslo a document in which the Palestinians were told, you basically lost, which is, it is true, they lost, and so you have to accept these terms, or was it an effort to try to reach a fair settlement, right? That's, there's a discrepancy in the narratives, and again, if what you're telling me is looking back, since the Palestinians were so weak, should they accepted a deal that deep down they felt was betrayal, surrender. I'll let others can make that judgment. But you also asked, why should Americans? So I wasn't sure about what you meant by that.
So, I mean, here's the reality. The reality is, as you point out, this is the weaker party. The state of Israel doesn't actually have to make this offer. Doesn't have to make any offers, okay? And we can count at least 2 serious offers, okay? I know you say Camp David wasn't an offer, but, there was a lot there. There was a process that could have led to something. I mean, everything I know about this, I just know from reading you. And then there's the Ehud Olmert offer. I mean, and the Palestinians, just as you said in your account, you said they greeted everything with rejection, with silence. They shook their heads at everything. And when, in fact, so if you're an American, you say like, oh, look, there's a famous story about Kissinger talking with the Egyptian author Mohammed Hassanein Haikal. And Haikal says to him something like, you have to understand, Egypt is not just a country, it is an idea, a tide, a historical movement. And Kissinger's like, yeah, I don't know how to deal with ideas tied to the historical movement. I can deal with countries, and like, so if the Palestinians aren't interested in a state in the West Bank and Gaza, which is all the U.S. can help them get.
But you really are, I think you're jumping to a much broader conclusion.
Okay.
Two points I would make. The first is, it's not that they're not interested in. The point is, that is not what they were fighting for, any more than the Zionist movement was fighting for a state on the borders of 67, right? And that was not what either movement was fighting for when the struggle began. And so if you want a sustainable peace, what you may have is a peace, not a peace, but some kind of arrangement that then explodes because one or the other side is dissatisfied.
Yeah.
So if what you're looking for is a resolution, and remember, whether it's Camp David or afterwards, the Israeli position was, this deal has to represent the end of all claims, right? And the end of conflict, end of all claims, which is not, you're not telling the Palestinians, accept this, and we could still debate in the future what kind of redress there might be for refugees or whatever. We're telling them, that's it. You have to be satisfied for the rest of times. Now, again, you say the Israelis made these offers and the Palestinians didn't. We're critical of the Palestinians, overly passive, not as proactive in putting ideas on the table.
Yes.
Again, we could explain, I'm sure we'll get into Camp David, all of the context that I think at least helps explain, if not justify it. But, there are other opportunities. The Arab peace proposal, right, that the Israelis rejected out of hand, which would have given normalization with all Arab states in exchange for withdrawal to the borders of 67 and a just solution to the refugee problem in accordance with UN Security Council resolutions. What do you say to that? The Israelis didn't accept that. So, we can go back and forth as to who accepted what.
Yeah.
And again, the proposals, and maybe we need to get into the details of the proposals, whether it's Camp David or whether it's what Ehud Olmert did. And again, I'm not here to defend the Palestinians, but I think it's overly simplistic to say the Palestinians rejected a state in the West Bank and Gaza, and they're not interested in it. It's not where their heart is.
Yeah.
They haven't fought since 1948 by definition for that, because why then did they fight between 1948 and 1967 when the land was in Arab hands? Clearly, this was a struggle about something deeper, and for neither side is it easy to admit the narrative of the other. For Palestinians to say, yeah, we were wrong, we were fighting only for the state in the borders of 67, then what was the fight about between 48 and 67? And did they fight and die in vain? And for the Israelis to accept the Palestinian narrative means that they've basically agreed that they have stolen land and are now giving back sort of a small fragment of that land. So there is a deep divide in perspectives, and the challenge is to find an outcome that's going to satisfy not just the technical details, but something deeper. Because, by the way, the truth is, and there are times when the Palestinians were more obstructionist, time when the Israelis were more obstructionist, and we're living in one of those times. We have an Israeli government today that doesn't accept even any notion of Palestinian statehood, right? Not a single member of the government, and the vast majority of the Knesset agrees with the government. So the question is, if that has failed for all these years, let's try to think of something that's going to be more likely to address the attachments and the yearnings of both
Yeah.
sides. But I'm happy to go back into some of the
No,
specifics of the history.
we can do that. You know, so last year I had an Israeli politician analyst here, Einat Wilf.
Yeah, I know.
And Einat Wilf, you know, was somebody from the peace camp, a real two-stater, et cetera. And, you know, I was arguing with her about exactly this, about, you know, her claim was that the Palestinians are not interested in their own state. They just want to deny the Jews a state of their own. And I was really arguing with her on this. And she said, explain to me then, Tarek, how come when the Palestinians reject offers, there's no Palestinian voice that says, hey, we should have taken that, like in the moment. And so I guess I'm just trying to, you know, I'm trying to come away from my dialogue with Rob Malley for something that would enable me to say that, no, the Palestinians aren't just going to shake their heads at everything. There is such a thing as a deal that they could make with the Jewish state that would involve them living side by side with a Jewish state.
So I don't know how to prove that, obviously, but there are countless moments where the Palestinians have said exactly that.
Yeah.
From 1988 forward, where they've said they would be prepared to accept, and they've recognized the state of Israel, as you know.
Yes.
They have a harder time, many of them accepting a Jewish state of Israel, and we could explain, you know, why that's a harder pill for them to digest, but to accept and recognize the state of Israel. A number of Palestinian leaders, all of the leaders on the non-Hamas side have said that, right? So they say but under conditions that they believe are the conditions that they need to accept and to sell the deal.
Yeah.
You're pointing to a real issue, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it is a real issue that the Palestinian national movement is not a movement that wasn't born over the issue of building a Palestinian state.
Yeah.
That is not the identity of the Palestinian national movement. As I said, it's a movement of liberation.
Yeah.
It's a movement that views itself very differently from even the way the Zionists viewed themselves at the beginning, which is more state-centered. That's not, the Palestinian cause at its inception is not about Palestinian statehood. That's true. Yeah. And I don't think there's any arguing about that. Does that mean that throughout their history, they never were in a position where they said, okay, if we could have a state that meets these criteria, and the criteria are, you know, full withdrawal, capital in East Jerusalem, and the rights of the refugees in some capacity, which, you know, we could debate. I don't even know what that looks like, because clearly full return of refugees is incompatible with the existence of a Jewish state. Yeah. But there are other, as we discuss in the book, there are other models of federation, confederation, in which refugees may be able to come back without threatening the demography of Israel. So I don't think you could, if you're having a debate with Einat Wilf or anyone else, and they tell you the Palestinians are not supremely interested in statehood.
That's not what she said. Go ahead.
No, if they said that, if they said that, I would concede the point. That's not what the struggle was about. Yeah. But does that mean that they could never accept it under the conditions where they feel like their historical narrative, their yearnings, and their fears are being addressed? Again, I don't know, but my suspicion is that they would accept.
Yeah, this now gets almost like to a little tension in your book, because, you know, you do say, I can't remember where I wrote down the quote, but I can't remember where I got it from. But you said, at the height of the peace process, when statehood and the prospect of a more tranquil life seemed within reach, many Palestinians were prepared to put more deeply held views about Israel aside and go along with these hesitant concessions. So that's consistent with what you're saying now, that in fact, yes, the Palestinians have some deep yearning for redress, for justice, but there are conditions under which they could be willing to accept two states. And then that suggests that the problem diagnosis that the book starts with, which is that the two-state solution doesn't address what these people care about, isn't quite right. The two-state solution is a thing that Palestinians...
I don't think it's inconsistent, right?
Yeah,
I think we often have dreams and aspirations which it's hard for us to give up on, right? Yeah. You need an ideal, set of circumstances to get to the point where A, you could accept it, and B, you could even see it as restoring some sense of dignity. And I think Arafat, and we criticize him, or at least we depict him, I think, with all his complexities, he was somebody who was able to convince his people at a time that what had been viewed as the ultimate betrayal by Palestinians, which is giving up 78% of historic Palestine, was actually the height of their achievement, right? But he dressed it up in a way that preserved their sense of achievement and victory never accomplished. So to say that it's not their natural aspiration, but that under certain conditions, people could agree to, give up some of what they really hold dear.
Yeah.
It's hard, and you have to do it in the right way. And part of what we describe is how, on time and time again, whether it's because of the U.S. or Palestinians and Israelis, they weren't able to do that. And so that raises the question, if you need ideal circumstances, and in history, ideal circumstances almost never arise. And secondly, whatever circumstances existed between 1993 and, say, the mid-aughts, we're so far from them today, right? I mean, in every respect, we're in a worse position now than we were when the peace process began and as it continued. Then this notion that, now we're going to get to the two-state solution, even when those ideal conditions were never existed, and we're much further away from them. I think there's a tension, and in some of the interviews I've said, yes, there's a tension, because it's hard to say it was always impossible. I mean, that's sort of 2020 hindsight, counterfactual, I don't know. To say that it was not, the reason it was so difficult to attain is not simply because the Palestinians were obstructionist. It's because it was not a natural idea. It's not, the two-state solution, partition, is not an Israeli or a Zionist or Palestinian idea. It's an idea that comes from the West. So it was not where they really wanted to go, and I think there was a time where one or the other was prepared to accept it, but it would have taken the conditions, the circumstances, and the politics that did it arise.
Can I ask, if each side could wave a magic wand and get its ideal, outcome, what would they?
I mean, that's
want?
An easy question.
So
each one would love to wake up with the other one no longer there.
Okay, so let me add a constraint. So you can't, that's not on the table. So the people who are between the river and the sea stay between the river and the sea. So let's talk about from the Palestinian perspective. So you said they don't want a state of their own. They want,
No.
Sorry. You said that's not what they care most about.
It wasn't at the origin of their struggle.
Today, would it be binationalism? Like if Palestinians could wave a magic wand, would it be a binational?
Listen, I'm not here to speak for the Palestinians or for the Israelis.
No,
so
but
I don't
you're
know.
A scholar.
No, but you're asking a question, what would they want if they had a magic wand? But then you take away.
Because the whole book is about what they want.
But it's not about a magic wand.
It's about, it's Rob Malley telling us what they want. So I'm asking you, what do they want?
Again, it's not what they want. I'm talking about where they're coming from, which is different. It's what is animating their emotions. What they want. I don't know. I mean, really, for me to sit here and say, I know the Palestinians want, if you believe polls, which I usually don't. I think they're very, I'm sure there's somebody here who specializes in polling, but I'm very dubious. Binationalism, I'm not sure the Palestinians want that, because they feel they're going to be, they do have a sense of national identity that's been formed, forged, and strengthened over time. They would fear, I suspect, that they would be second-class citizens in a binational state. And certainly Israeli Jews, that's not what they want. So even though you ask me as an individual, ethically, morally, nice, I just don't think that that's really what's going to resonate with them. So I don't know what they want, but again, what we try to describe are outcomes in which both sides feel like they have a sense of self-determination. They rule themselves, they govern themselves, they decide how they want to live. Nobody is telling them how they live, and they live with equal rights. But Palestinians also feel, for example, that the history of 1948 hasn't been erased. Maybe, and again, it's one of the ideas that others have developed far more deeply than we do in the book. Maybe refugees can have Palestinian citizenship, but could live anywhere in the land between the river and the sea. And maybe settlers can do the same thing, so that if you're an Israeli Jew who cares deeply, deeply about parts of what they call Judea, Samaria, West Bank, maybe you could respect that. And maybe if you're a refugee,
this is the land for all
that's
idea.
One idea. Many others, this is something that different people have looked at, and some of them are more morally appealing than others. The point is, that's not necessarily inconsistent with two entities that govern themselves. But it does more than the two-state solution as we have come to understand it, to address what is at the root of the problem. And the root of the problem, again, is not a matter of, well, where exactly is the line going to be in the West Bank? That was a very technical, profoundly American way of defining and trying unsuccessfully to resolve the conflict.
But you know, that's interesting. I mean, because you do say this at a few places in the book, that the American dysfunction was mainly that they were about, like, where do we draw the line on the map? They approached it as a technical. Yeah, we will get into that in a second. But interestingly, the idea that you just proposed now, which would be, you know, allowing Jews to live in the West Bank and allowing Arabs to be residents in the places that we call Israel proper and live, you know, that's just a new, novel and interesting technical idea. You know, it's about, like, you know, so an Arab could have a residency permit in the Jewish state and a Jew could have a residency permit. You know, in other words, it's not that the solution isn't available to us, that we need to do some, you know, kind of national, you know, I don't know what it is, like exorcism of past sins. It's just the solution, you know, has this.
I think. So, with due respect.
No, please. Show with disrespect.
So, of course, every solution in the end, you could say, well, you're going to have to write it out, so it's a technical solution. The issue is, what are the matters that you're going to look at? Now, one of the members of the American team at the tail end of Camp David, when we were in this depressed post-mortem mode, he was the lawyer on the team, brilliant guy. And we were all going around the room, what went wrong? And what he said was, our mistake as Americans is we didn't respect the issues enough. Mm-hmm. We thought we could play with them. And so what you're saying now, yeah, of course, it's just a matter of residency. No, because the premise of that is to say, you know what? The refugee issue is not simply, and I was as guilty of it as anyone, to say, my God, if we have to address the question of refugees, we can't even address the territorial issue, so how are we going to get that? Or how are we going to address issues of religion or of history? Those all seem to be impediments and obstacles when they were the problem. And so if they're the problem, you have to overcome them. You can't simply sweep them under the carpet and say, they're too complicated, we'll deal with them later, right? In some kind of process. For now, what we're trying to do is resolve the conflict. But how do you resolve the conflict if you don't resolve what's at the root of the conflict? So I think I think it's more than what you're saying, which is, let's just think of residency permits. No, it's how do you apprehend the conflict? What is it about? And I think there was an allergy to think of 1948. And again, Hussein and I say it in the book, we were among the crowd that whenever people came to us and said, well, what about 48? We said, come on, we have a big enough headache dealing with 67. You're now going to bring up issues that are unresolvable, but I think that was the wrong way to look at it. And, you know, you mentioned land for all the other ideas that confederation with Jordan, other things to sort of try to break the mold.
I mean, that's certainly not what Palestinians fought for, is confederation with Jordan. Like,
so do you know the person who was number 2 to Arafat used to say, give us our independence for 5 minutes, and then we'll merge with Jordan. You know, I'm not sure that what you're saying is accurate. You know, I think they had an idea that they wanted, again, liberation and be able to live their lives, and in what way it's done, that's
but hold on. I mean, if you said, give us, you know, the premise of your book is that that gentleman did not represent the Palestinian.
Which gentleman?
The gentleman who said, give us our independence and then we'll work with Jordan, because you just said Palestinian's independence isn't the thing.
No.
Anyways, can we move on to one?
You
know, let me just say,
isn't the thing doesn't mean that it's not a thing.
People should read this wonderful book to determine whether my reading of it or
my writing of it.
It's more accurate. Can I say the other thing that I found about this book, which, by the way, I should just say, this is a beautifully written book. It is one of the most important books I have read in the last 10 years, and it's the kind of book I expect to keep reading every year.
And they'll understand it better each time.
No, you know, Touche. Okay, so, but one of the things also that I feel like this book kind of pulls the rug out from under me in a lot of ways. Like when I try to make an argument to Israeli interlocutors about the seriousness of Palestinians as partners for peace, or the possibilities of living side by side with Palestinians. And like, you'll often hear from Israelis that, look, the Palestinians just want to kill us. And, you know, I argue against that vehemently. And then in this book, you say, you know, October 7th was Palestinian to the core. You say when Palestinians are evaluating a group like Hamas, you say they may not espouse Hamas's conservative social vision, but their position on Israel and the use of violence against it rang as a truer, more authentic expression of their feelings. And I think, okay, if what Rob Malley and Hussein Agha are saying there is true, then how do we criticize Netanyahu and others who say, look, the only way to deal with the Palestinians is to defeat them again and again and again until they surrender or leave?
So first, you left out, of course, what we say about the Israelis, where we say that the Israeli slaughter, what increasing number of experts are calling a genocide, was also Israeli through and through. So it's not, so you could say if you're Palestinian.
Fair. Do you think it was a genocide, by the way?
So I'm not an expert on this, and my view on
you have to be an
whether
expert to have a view on this? Yeah. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm not a legal scholar, but I do.
Okay.
But two things
You're
I
a
would
lawyer.
say. No, two things.
Yeah,
I was a lawyer. I wish.
Yeah.
Two things I say. Number one, an increasing number of experts, including Holocaust genocide experts, describe it as a genocide. And secondly, whether you call it genocide, crimes against humanity, war crimes, is that the company Israel wants to be in? We're not a genocide, but we're something. So I'm not sure that that would be.
But
let me answer. Let me answer your question.
Yeah.
It's an extraordinary question. I don't even know how to take the question to say, oh, the Palestinians, and again, we could say the same about the Israelis, but the Palestinians are espouse violence and they had.
I don't think October 7th was Palestinian to the core. You do.
Yes, I do in this sense. When you've lived under the conditions that they've lived in for the last decades, when they feel like they have been dispossessed, killed, humiliated, they've lost everything, at that point, then maybe you would have a taste for revenge, and I think that's human, and I think, again, we describe the Israeli point of view as being, but to jump from that to say, oh, therefore, we can't make peace with the Palestinians, it's turning it upside down. The conditions on the ground are what produce the anger, the violence, the hatred on both sides. It's the conditions. It's not something essentialist or intrinsic in their people. I mean, you know that Ehud Barak, no less than Ehud Barak, no less than...
Yes, said he would have been a terrorist.
They all
yes.
say it.
Yes.
Anyone who's worked in Israeli security would, not anyone, but most of them say, if I were a Palestinian...
Yes.
So does that mean that they suddenly are terrorist violence? No, it means that they understand that the conditions of oppression, of suppression, that those produce, and all people, not just Palestinian, we could look at resistance movements throughout history. So I'm not sure that that's the answer to the. I'm sorry if I pull the rug from underneath.
No,
this rug I'm going to put back in. I don't think that this is an indictment. I think where I could imagine that you would have liked the book to be slightly different is to say, oh, the Palestinians never rejected. I mean, you wouldn't say that, but didn't reject any offer. That they were always that in fact the whole characterization of them as being reticent to accept what was proposed. Yeah, I think we're trying to be honest about it. But again, I do think we should talk about those moments because they've been turned into instruments of demonization of the Palestinians. Camp David in particular has become the two-word answer to anyone who wants to speak about Palestinians as deserving of rights. They had Camp David, they blew it. And that I think is
so I do want to get to Camp David, but I guess just the point I want to end on here is just the idea when you say that October 7th was Palestinian to the core, and you also say it has there was a prehistory to October 7th. I mean, you point out in this book that October 7th recalled nothing so much as the Fedayeen raids that used to happen. Killing Israeli civilians is a thing that the PLO used to do repeatedly. But I guess the natural point there is somebody will say, okay, so basically you're telling me that the Palestinians have always done October 7th-like things, and that's before there was an occupation. That's before 67. Fedayeen raids were before 67.
Okay, but Tarek, you can't say. Again, Palestinian struggle begins in 1948. They believe the occupation. I mean, if you were Palestinian, and I guess Ehud Barak might say the same. If you were Palestinian in 1948, you were part of the 700,000 people who were forced to leave your land. You may also say that. So. And
Moshe Dayan said that at the funeral of Roy Rothberg.
So you could invoke Israelis to make your point. Again, and you asked me why the title of the book. October 7th, what really distinguished it was that it, quote unquote, succeeded, right? And beyond probably the expectation of the people who ordered it. And what distinguished Israel's response was that they had the opportunity to go as far as they did. But neither one were aberrations, as I said at the beginning.
Let's talk about America's role. So in this book, you say America's presence distorted the playing field. It warped how Israelis and Palestinians interacted. You even suggest that things might have been better for both of those peoples had the U.S. not gotten involved at all. Can you explain?
So, the point is, if you look at, as I said, look at where we were in 1993, look at where we are today. Look at it in terms of attitudes of both sides. Look at it in terms of the situation on the ground, exponential growth in settlements, home demolitions. Look at it in terms of the violence. And this is a period where the U.S. was, quote unquote, in charge of the peace process, right? It's hard to say that, of course, things could be worse, but they're pretty terrible. As during a period where the U.S. was, as we say, the sole superpower and had huge leverage with both parties.
Yes.
Right? With all parties. So that's a huge indictment. Now, your question about the counterfactual, which we raise, of course, if the U.S. was not at all present, does that mean the U.S. has not provided military assistance to Israel? Or is the U.S. providing military assistance to Israel but not getting involved in the peace process? I don't know, but the basic fact I think it's hard to escape is if somebody asks you, what good did the U.S. do? That would be a hard question to answer.
Right. And one of the reasons the U.S. isn't able to succeed at peacemaking, as you point out in this book, is they approach it as if it's a border dispute. But you said that's not the only reason.
No, there's also the inherent bias of the U.S. approach.
To who?
I think most people here understood. But,
no, but this will hopefully have a global.
No, I mean, listen, as I said earlier, when you have an asymmetric relationship, which is where the power is so disproportionate, and the sole superpower comes in and puts its thumb on the scale of the party that is stronger, you don't really need to say much more. But it goes beyond that is our entire conversation. And again, I mean, I think a lot of American leaders who I worked for, I think it was in good faith. But they did have a certain, as I talked at the beginning, what the trajectory they were. They did not come to it from nobody comes from anything from a neutral point of view. They had a certain baggage. And so what they believed to be not just monumental Israeli concessions, but concessions that the Palestinians should have sort of fainted as good as they were. When I first joined the team, and I don't think you were there, Ed Dirigian here, who's part of the American team that actually did do something as opposed to the ones that followed. When we joined the team, I remember one of my first meetings with the American team, Shimon Peres had said, either publicly or privately, that Israel was prepared to withdraw from 80% of the West Bank. And I remember the reaction of most of the American team was, this is unbelievable. 80%, who would have believed? Again, because Israel had the upper hand. As you said earlier, why should they withdraw? I mean, what's the pressure on them to withdraw? And Gamal Halal and I, you mentioned Gamal, we both were like, well, 80% is nice, but from a Palestinian perspective, how do you justify to them that it's not 100%? And the answer that one of the Americans gave is our job is not to balance the rights of both sides, but the needs of both sides.
That was Dennis Ross who said that.
And even that, I'm not sure what it means, the needs, but he felt security needs was 80%. And of course, then when the Israelis went to 85, 90, each time it was greeted as sort of an act of utter generosity. But so I think the starting point was such that the U.S. was not in a position to truly reconcile narratives when it was much more familiar. I don't even know that it was a matter of choosing between the two. I think they were familiar with one, didn't quite get the other.
But why didn't, if the U.S. was as biased as you say, and I certainly grew up in the Middle East with that narrative, and that's certainly been my default assumption. But if the U.S. was as biased towards Israel as you say, why wouldn't they just have underwritten all of the most extreme Israeli, somebody could
I see how you'd be very good as a law professor because you take the exam and then you push it to the extreme. I'm not saying that the U.S. was so biased that it was. In fact, what I just said now,
I mean, Israelis.
Part of it was their own cultural makeup and their own historical makeup, and there's also strategic reasons why Israel was considered to be. You quoted Kissinger; he cares about states. Don't really care about people and movement, that what how many tanks do they have?
Yeah.
So I think that all of that comes into play. Now, I do think Clinton would have not liked nothing more than to be the father of a peace deal. I think Obama would have been like nothing more. Even George W. Bush, they would have loved to reach peace. They had a certain way of approaching it, defining peace, defining what a fair, just, or necessary settlement would be. So I don't think there's no incompatibility between saying they were biased, they had a prejudiced or biased view of the situation, but not that they were 100%. They said, yes, we want greater Israel and we want to ethnically cleanse the Palestinians. No, but I don't think those two are incompatible. You could be biased, but still understand that one side can't get everything.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess that's there are some Israelis who will say, and I admit when they say this to me, I think like, what planet are you living on? But they'll say, the US has been totally biased towards the Palestinians. And the only reason—
Who says that?
Well, I'm not gonna name names but the point, even I'll tell you, somebody who sat here and said some analog of that was Jared Kushner. He said, every time the Palestinians say jump, we say how high. And I was like, really? But there's a perspective that thinks of it that way. And I think it's a perspective that emerges from starts from the notion that, look, if you don't have power, you should thank God that you're not,
100%.
Being kicked out of the, pushed out of the West Bank and Gaza. And so, there's an alternative account that says, but for the United States and its involvement in this, whether it's involved— Let me finish.
No. But involvement, I want to make clear, without any military assistance to Israel, without any economic assistance, then the question changes a bit, right? So when you say no involvement, you got to be clear what you mean by that. None at all. We're out of the conflict. We're not providing aid to either side.
Yeah, you think if
I don't know what would have happened.
Okay, I
don't know.
I assume that the Israeli side would have been still the more economically powerful, stronger, etc.
Yeah, it would have been more powerful. Would it have been able to destroy, decimate, and eliminate the Palestinians? I don't know, but that's a very different situation. Yeah. Even in the recent war, Israel would not have been able to do what it did without U.S. support.
Fair enough. What's the U.S. interest in all of this? Why do we care about this? I know why I, as an Arab, care about it, but why should this country care about it?
Why should it? Why has it?
Why should it?
There's so many different, I could give you there's obviously the moral humanitarian reason, which may not animate governments. I think it animates a lot of Americans, but, but there's also the ricochet effects, right? A lot of the instability in the Middle East has hurt American interests. Violence in the Middle East has directly affected American interests. And you could get to issues like oil flow. So I think there's reasons why the U.S. has been involved in the Middle East. I've been very critical of both the way and the intensity of the involvement. I think we've invested too much in the Middle East and we've gotten very few returns, and we've invested poorly. But the notion that the U.S. has had an interest historically, you could even go back to the Cold War era, but that the U.S. has had an interest in trying to stabilize the region. And as we argue in the book, that interest has led the U.S. to promote a peace process, because that serves a lot of interests, right? You get a peace process, you satisfy Arab countries, you're able to tell them, we're trying. You manage to placate some of the pressure by others to get involved, the Europeans, the Arabs. You tell the Israelis, we have your back. Getting the solution, which is going to entail breaking some China and angering either one side or the other, that's less of a strategic interest. I think the administrations I've served, if I look back, their interest was truly in the effort less than the outcome. The outcome was a nice to have, not a need to have. As I said, I think President Clinton would have loved nothing more than to be able to say, I brought peace. I think President Trump would love to get his Nobel Prize for bringing peace. So there is the personal dimension. But in terms of the strategic calculus, I think it's interest in the region, whether it's stability, oil flow, security of Israel. We do have a strategic relationship with Israel, and placating rest of public opinions, whether they're in the Arab world and sometimes domestically.
Okay, I want to, in the time that we have remaining before I open it up to our fantastic audience, I wanted to talk a little bit about Camp David. This is the, negotiation that, you worked very hard on at the tail end of the Clinton administration, which is often, as you pointed out, brought up as an instance where the Palestinians were given a great deal by Ehud Barak, the prime minister at the time, and then they walked away from it. And so, we had your former professor, Alan Dershowitz, here, who made the same argument. And I tried to read him chapter and verse from various things of yours that I've read, and he wasn't having any of it. What does that narrative that the Palestinians walked away, what is it getting wrong, briefly?
I can't be too brief, but I'll try to be brief. I do see the clock. And first of all, I want to say, at some level, that whole debate seems to be so irrelevant given where we are today.
Yeah.
Again, no member of the Israeli government accepts the principle of Palestinian state. A vast majority of the Israelis reject it. The Knesset rejects it. Okay, so why people have dug this up, which they have after October 7th, precisely for that reason. First, the first impact of Camp David in 2000, after it failed and the blame was put entirely on the Palestinians, was to demonize not just Yasser Arafat, he could live with that, not just the Palestinian movement, but in the words of some, and we quote them, the Palestinian people as a whole.
Yes.
That they'll never accept peace, right? Sort of the charge that you're trying to rebuff. Now it's being used since October 7th. I've heard some, and I don't need to mention names either, but I think some of you will know, who say, well, when I speak to students and they tell me how terrible Israel's war is and why is the U.S. supporting it, they say, they never, when I tell them what the Palestinians rejected in 2000, it changes their perspective. Like, how could the Palestinians complain when they had such an opportunity?
Yeah.
So if this is a way to justify what happened since October 7th, that's an even worse use of Camp David than I'd expected. So very quickly, and again, the book goes through it in detail. First, I do think context matters, and I'm not somebody who usually spends that much time with the psychology of leaders, but I want you to put yourself, anyone, in Arafat's shoes. Ehud Barak is elected. What's the first thing he does? He tells the Palestinians, we're going to renegotiate the deal that my predecessor, Benjamin Netanyahu, when he agreed to another withdrawal of territory from the West Bank. Let's put that aside. We're not going to do that.
Yes.
Second thing, I'm going to allow greater settlement construction because I need to placate my right wing. Third thing, I'm going to negotiate not with you because you know what, as you said, quoting Kissinger, who cares about who's the mayor of Ramallah? What we care about is Syria. They're a real country, real state, real army.
Yeah.
So that's what we're going to do. And you Palestinian, you could cool your heels. All of a sudden, when the negotiations with the Syrians fail, as they did, maybe not surprisingly, Barak says, now we got to go. We have a month or two.
Yeah.
We need a final settlement deal. We need to have the summit in Camp David. It needs to be, his words, a pressure cooker where the Palestinians are faced with a choice. Either they reach the deal or they're going to be the pariah and they're going to be isolated and the Americans are going to write them off.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden, from ignoring them, so, okay, if you're a Palestinian, if you're Arafat, who already your suspicion level is sky high because of the way you've been treated for the last year, and now you're being told the Americans and the Israelis have agreed that after you begged for a process, suddenly you're going to get one, but it's going to be on Israeli and American terms. I think, again, I'm not excusing him, but you could understand why he would view this as a trap, which is how he entered it. He entered it, he begged both Clinton and Albright. He said, don't bring me to Camp David. I can't do it. It's going to fail. It's going to blow up in our faces. To which the answer was, don't worry, we're not going to blame you. Of course, they were blamed. Yeah. So that's in terms of the context, which, again, and if you read the book, you'll see Barak says, all that is psychodrama. And yet those are all arguments that Barak invoked for himself. Why did I have to expand settlements? To shore up my domestic base. Why did I have to ignore the Palestinians? To show that I'm strong. So, what's good for one should be good for the other. But then when you come to what actually happens there, again, we describe it, but I don't know how many people know. There was never a map at Camp David. So the Palestinians are asked to agree to something that says 91% of the West Bank in exchange for, and you'll get a trade-off of 1%.
Yes.
Why 91? Why 1?
Right.
Why not 100? No explanation.
Right.
Jerusalem, some cockamamie division of things. Again, no map, no details. The whole proposal, if I put it to you here, I think type double-spaced, maybe 3 pages. And so, again, from a Palestinian mindset, where they do feel the weaker party, so all that is true, they're being asked to sign a document in which they're giving up the last remaining claims they have, which is 22%, rights of refugees, East Jerusalem is our capital, in exchange for extremely vague, no map, no details, no proposal. And they know that Barak probably only has a few months left in office. Clinton certainly does. So their fear, again, don't have to accept it, but just if you want to understand why this was not the offer that they saw, and then they rejected this fantastic offer. From their perspective, it was a piece of paper without, not even a piece of paper, maybe I think it was orally conveyed. And they would give up what they considered to be the remaining Palestinian constants in exchange for a promissory note that Ehud Barak's successor and Clinton's successor could say, that was good for Clinton. It's not good for us, but by the way, now we know what your concessions are.
Well, I'm totally, persuaded by what you say on this, and it's basically shaped my thinking forever on it. And the other point that you don't make so much in this book, but you've made elsewhere, is that Camp David wasn't the end of it. The negotiations continued. They continued at Taba, and then it's Barak who has to cut off the negotiations to go and face elections. So it's hard to describe that as a moment of just Palestinian
And by the way, just read what Ehud Barak, people always focus on, the Israelis are much better at it, I admit it, and but the Palestinians had all these reservations. Ehud Barak did too. In fact, he says yes, and then he sends his envoy to tell us the 10 or 20 reservations they had. In the interviews, which we quote, he said, I was only doing this to test the Palestinians. I never made any concessions. So, both sides.
But here's the point. So I, like I said, absolutely come at this as a student of Rob Malley, and I quoted Rob Malley to Alan Dershowitz. And then this is back to how I feel like this book pulls the rug out from under me in so many ways.
Sorry.
So you make it seem in this book like a two-state solution can never emerge as the result of a negotiated settlement. And you say the following, you say, the act of fighting justified what Palestinians were fighting for, even if it was only a state. Offered on a platter, served courtesy of the United States.
We don't need violence, right? So there's been context.
Okay, you're not gonna let me finish the sentence.
Well, because you're taking out of
Let me finish the sentence.
Okay.
I mean, it's such a beautiful,
go.
You're such a great writer.
Start it again.
Served on a platter, courtesy of the United States to protect Israel, it lost its flavor, a reheated, tasteless glob. At the end of the day, if the Palestinians are going to get a state, it's going to be as the result of a negotiation. And this book made me feel like you were saying they didn't want it. They weren't up for it.
So please read the book. He's doing a great job at promoting it, but you do need to read it. The point we're making is there was a time, really, where Arafat managed to imbue the whole notion of a two-state solution with the aura of is a Palestinian triumph. What happens afterwards, everything I just described about Camp David, everything about when American leaders talk about why they want a two-state solution, it's very seldom because Palestinians have rights. It's to save the possibility of a Jewish democratic state, right? That's the argument that is being given to Palestinians and others as to why there should be a state. It's because of the interest of...
It's because in this country, if
Palestinians
object to that...
Let me finish.
Sorry, forgive me.
Other cases, it's in the language of Americans. We need this in order to defang the more radical militant Palestinians. So we need to prop up, whether it's Salam Fayyad or others. So the whole... all of this matters, right? Particularly when it's going to be so hard to get it to a two-state solution. It matters when what it looks like is the Americans saying, we're doing this not for you, we're doing it in order to prop up a minority on your side who is technocratic. It's in order to save Israel from its own future, in order to have a front against Iran, or front against Islamists, or front against Iraq. Because this was not... again, and I'm saying this, and I'm sorry if you feel this is pulling the rug from underneath you, because this was not the core of the Palestinian struggle, it needed to be dealt with smartly. And I think the way it was done, it really made the Palestinians feel like they were being treated as, what do we need to do to promote these other interests? What do we need to do with the Palestinians in order to promote these other interests? It doesn't mean, again, I'll say this, and I'm not a prophet. It doesn't mean that the two-state solution was never possible, or who knows,
not
maybe
possible in the future.
But to try to understand why it failed, our explanation is not because the Palestinians are obstreperous, or not because Barak had only a month left, and all of that is true. All of that is true. Like even Ehud Olmert, by the time he puts his offer,
he was about to go to jail.
He was closer to jail than he was to the prime minister's office. So again, if you're President Abbas and you're told, you have to accept this, there's some concessions. He's going to have to go home and say, folks, right of return, rights of refugees is buried. And we're doing this for somebody who's not going to be prime minister, and his successor is going to be much more hardline than he was. It's so all of that is true, but we're trying to look at something deeper and tell a deeper story, which is, if it needed all these ideal conditions,
Yeah.
maybe there was something in the diagnosis that was wrong.
Yeah.
And maybe we need to open up. And it doesn't mean accept the fact that the Palestinians can never accept a renegotiated solution.
Yeah.
Accept the fact that for the Palestinians, all these other things matter.
Yeah.
History, sense of dispossession, desire for liberation.
do you-
Just as on the Israeli side,
Right.
all these things matter. Their history,
Yeah.
Holocaust.
Do you think part of the problem on the Palestinian side, why they couldn't, bring themselves to seal a deal, is because the Palestinian leadership lacks democratic legitimacy? Like, if you're going to sign away everything but, all but a symbolic right of return, like, it would help if you actually had some democratic legitimacy. The fact of the matter is that these people are, as one prominent Palestinian I admire called them, chicken thieves. They don't really represent the Palestinian people. They certainly don't have democratic legitimacy, and consequently can't make these hard.
So I'm not, democratic legitimacy, I'm going to use another word.
Yeah.
Are they representative of the Palestinian people? And I think, again, there was a time when the Palestinian leadership was.
Yeah.
I think today it isn't. And I don't know that I would jump, like I would make an argument that a huge mistake that was made since 2006 is in the name of ensuring that Hamas would not win,
Yeah.
we would obstruct elections time and time again. I raise as a hypothetical, and as I said earlier, I don't really particularly like counterfactuals. If you had elections on the various occasions when elections were supposed to take place, and either because of American or Israeli or Palestinian Authority objections, and often all three, you didn't have elections. If you'd had new elections, say in 2021 when they were supposed to take place, what might it have affected Hamas's way of thinking?
Yeah.
I mean, we could also talk about the siege of Gaza. Had it not been what it was, might it have affected Hamas's way of thinking? I don't know.
Yeah.
But all we know is that the way it was dealt with, was a contributing factor to the catastrophe.
So I do have to take questions, but I want to just end on one question about looking forward. And in this book, you said something that I found very persuasive. You said, look, they could have made a deal. Like, you could imagine the U.S. imposes a deal and they sign it off. You just said something like it now, but it would ultimately fail because you'd say, one or both sides at some point might well have called the deal into questions, their unrealized hopes rising up against the compromise, right? So essentially, if people think they have a better alternative to a negotiated agreement, they're not gonna stick with the negotiated agreement. Is it possible that October 7th, the horror of that day for Jewish Israelis, and then the aftermath of October 7th and the absolute carnage and destruction that have happened in Gaza might actually make a settlement more likely because now both sides see the alternative to a negotiated settlement?
Very hard for me. I mean, I know we'd like to, well, it's not the end, but I'd like to offer you some optimism. It's very hard for me to see coming out of what we have just experienced. Suddenly the Israelis and Palestinians are going to realize that they have no alternative. I'm not sure the Israelis believe they have no alternative. Palestinians may today have a harder time thinking of it, but I think for many Israelis, as you said earlier, there's one answer, which is continued domination, because in their view, if you lift the foot, then look at what they do to you. So maybe there'll be some outcome that will come out of it. It will be at best sort of a temporary outcome that I think will be resisted over time by Palestinians because they're not going to accept subjugation. But it's hard for me to see today. Again, the conditions are far worse on every level, even before October 7th. But now with October 7th and the war that followed, to imagine that they're going to be able to find something, again, maybe some kind of modus vivendi, which would be, by the way, much better than what we've just experienced. Modus vivendi, I could imagine, but more than that, I don't want to leave false hope.
All right. So we have time for questions. So why don't you put up your hand? I've got 2 mics, and I will call on folks. Yusundus, wait for me to call on the person. We want this person over here in the front row.
You just did that to show that show you up,
Yep. And if you're comfortable, let me just say one thing before, give him the mic, before you ask your question. This event is being recorded and you are being recorded. So by asking a question, you are consenting to have your voice and visage recorded and beamed throughout the known universe for all time. And with that, go ahead.
Of course, thank you very much. Throughout your talk, I've been thinking, and I'm very curious to hear your opinion on this, in the realm of like all possible solutions and compromises, call it 50-50, call it binational, call it 78-22, the very mindset of the Palestinian people, and I would say even the Arab people at large, is that they deserve 100% of this land, right? And whatever like intermediate solution you would reach in the meantime, how do you change the mindset of a people, or even as an Arab, I feel like it's a betrayal to even try to change the mindset of a people to accept something in between and not take this as an intermediate step for more and more and more over time.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, no, thanks. So first, it's sort of the answer I tried to give to Tarek, but probably not convincingly enough since you're raising it. I don't think the Palestinians are stupid. Like, I think they know they're not going to destroy Israel. I don't even think October 7th that Sinwar had this idea that because of this attack, Israel will disappear. So I think they know they're not going to get 100%, right? So I don't think that's the issue. And again, I don't think we ever say in the book, and I don't think I said today, that what they not just want, but they are going to conduct their policy in order to achieve is they're in charge of all of the land between the river and the sea.
You're never clear on that, but you do say they said no, confident that time was on their side.
Yeah, time is on their side to get a better deal. To get a better deal, because again, I mean, we could go through it, but there's never. And again, maybe they should have accepted it. So I'm not passing a value judgment, but just a factual statement. They were never offered what I think, in the abstract, people would consider a sovereign, fully sovereign state on all of the land that they had conceded to, which is 22%. So I'm not saying, again, I want to try to make it clear. Maybe it's clear in the book, maybe not. Maybe on the seventh read you'll get it. And seventh copy you buy, to quote Ed. Each copy gets better every time you buy another one. But it's that,
unfortunately,
that recognition, right? That they were wronged in 1948 and the refugees need some kind of redress. That has to be part of the equation. It can't be ignored and say, that's all swept under the carpet. Just as I think Israeli Jewish fears, which Palestinians may think are completely exaggerated, and what are they talking about? Another Holocaust, another pogrom, that's how they feel, right? And so if the solution doesn't address their security fears, it's not going to be a solution. So I don't know that they need to be educated that they're not going to get the full land. I trust enough Palestinians I've spoken to, I think they're quite realistic about that part. They may be unrealistic about even the more that they want, but they don't think, I don't know any Palestinian, maybe some who says, we think tomorrow we're going to get all of it. Now, do some of them believe, and this is what Hamas, when I used to meet with them, would say, they said, let's reach some kind of hudna, let's reach some kind of mutual modus vivendi, coexistence, and then we'll leave it to the next generation or the generation after that to decide. Do they want to live all together? Do they want to go back to war? Do they not? I don't know what the answer is. But again, I trust some degree of realism that the Palestinians don't have this fantasy. They may have, when they're deep at night, when they're sleeping, it'd be great if we woke up tomorrow and all of this was a nightmare and Israel doesn't exist. I don't think that they think that that's going to happen, even when some of the rhetoric may suggest it. So I don't think I think the challenge is to find a way, at least as we define the challenge, not to erase Israel or not to erase the Palestinians, but to accommodate both of them in what their deep aspirations are. And by deep aspirations, I don't mean disappear, get rid of the other.
Yeah, I think
you want to leave them.
What's really,
gotta leave them.
Don't try to escape. I think what's really clarifying about his question is that, your book makes it very clear that this is a mutually created problem, that it's not just Palestinian rejectionism or Palestinian aspirations for something else. There's also Israeli aspirations for something else. And so, October 7th, you could imagine, in response to his question, that October 7th, the aftermath of October 7th and the absolute carnage may have had the effect of focusing some of the minds of the Palestinian leaders on, a kind of two-state solution. But I guess it wouldn't have had any similar effect on the other side.
I'm not sure that they had the second Intifada where they were crushed. So I'm not sure. But I want to say there's one thing, if Hussein were here, and he didn't come to the U.S., but if he were, I think he'd say, again, it's not that either side needs 100%,
Yeah.
but you can't ask one side to give up their identity or
Yeah.
their love. And he said, if you're in love with somebody, I'm not going to tell you, forget it, you're not in love
Yeah.
anymore. You are still in love with all of the land, you're in love with your history.
Yeah.
You may not be able to be with the person you're in love with, but you have to find a way
Yeah.
to take that into account. And you can't divide it and say,
Yeah.
okay, half the love is accommodated and
Yeah.
the other isn't.
Yeah.
So again, it doesn't lend itself to a neat solution, but it's not a neat conflict.
Right. Okay, let's take a question from this side over here. Just put up your hand and I'll call on you. Yes, sir.
Thank you. From my superficial knowledge of each of the attempts to make a solution, it seemed that the point that it always failed on was what you called a reasonable solution to the refugees, the right of return. And isn't that what the love is? That without the right of return, it's very hard to sell it to the Palestinian people. And the leaders are afraid of trying to sell that. If you said only 700,000 come back, and that won't affect the demographics of the state. But some people have characterized it, okay, two-state solution, both of which ultimately are Arab. So that and any insight you could give us about that would be helpful.
I don't know if it's the obstacle. I think an issue is the refugee issue, and what we're careful in the book to refer less to right of return than to refugee rights. Refugees it's not the same, right? I mean, you could respect the refugees' rights, and again, there are other people who've thought about it. They could come back as residents but not citizens, or they could come back and have visitation rights to the land where they were, or there could be some way to recognize that this was their land and it was taken away. They could have cemetery. Again, I'm not going to speak for the refugees, but to ignore them, which most of the peace processes basically said, what they said was they could go back to Palestine, which is not really going back to where they were from, and let's call that the right of return. That's, as we describe in the book, that was what the Clinton parameters did. They said, Clinton, we quote him as saying, this is mainly an issue of formulation. We need to call it the right of return, even though it isn't. And our view is, you need to find some way to acknowledge what happened to them and to afford them rights. Is the right going to be all of them to return? Do they believe? I mean, even you ask refugees, do they think they're all going to return? Again, as I just told the gentleman, I don't think they're crazy. They don't understand that that's not going to happen. But there may be answers that give them a sense that their struggle wasn't in vain and they didn't spend now almost a century in refugee camps, immiserated for nothing, all for the sake of a mistake. So again, I think these issues matter. They may sound abstract, but I'm amazed when Americans say, oh, this is just abstract, amorphous stuff. We care about ideology too, today quite a bit. But I mean, there is a long tradition of Americans who care about issues of dignity and who wouldn't have traded off what they considered to be their rights, even if they had economic opportunity. So I know Palestinians are not all going to return. I'm not sure that they all want to return. Where would they return to? Their villages don't exist anymore. But is there some way to accommodate their feeling that they would suffer a historic wrong and they need to have some way to have it acknowledged?
There's another very good point in this book where Hussein tells a story about talking to a Norwegian diplomat, and the Norwegian diplomat is purely talking about the people who are currently living between the river and the sea. And he comes to Hussein and says, what do you think about my speech? And Hussein says, you forgot the refugees, and you don't understand that is a major part of the constituency of the Palestinian leadership that nobody's factoring in here. I thought that was very useful. Okay, we have one question here, and then we'll have one question here, and then we'll end.
My question is exactly the same.
I could take a few more.
Okay, so we'll take this question here, and then we'll Dana, and then we'll take Bettina. Yeah.
Hi,
and then we'll close.
Thank you so much for this conversation. I'm Dana. I'm from Israel. I wanted to ask, I want to leave here with a little bit of hope. And I know it's really hard right now for a lot of reasons to find hope. But if you could tell all of the relevant leaders or whoever needs to be told something, what to do in the next year or two, what would be the best case scenario for how we move forward?
Do you want to take a few, or just I'll answer this one?
It sounds like you want me to take a few.
Sure.
Let me take that next question, and then you can answer whichever parts of them you want. This is not a pen.
Oh, it's not a pen. Sorry, go ahead.
You came unprepared. It's not. What am I supposed to do? Okay.
Hi, I also echo the thanks for this event. I'm Bertina. I'm a first-year master's student here. My question was, it seems to me, at least from this conversation, a lot of the framing of this conflict has been Israel and Palestine and maybe U.S. as the intermediary with, Israel the greater power, the U.S. putting the finger on the scale for the greater power. And that seems to disattach from the broader regional conflict of, first the Arab-Israeli conflict, more recently the Iran-Israeli conflict. Would you disattach those two? Do you think it's no longer, or you no longer live in a world where those two struggles work together or interdependent?
One more, and I'll see if how good my memory is.
Okay, last one. You're going to regret having taken this question, by the way.
I'm going to be like Trump. It's amazing if I could remember this. I'll pass my
make a
test.
meta argument about the mismatch between the deep aspirations of people and the actual lines being drawn in the paper. But when every single time you dive into the details, it's really about a commitment problem, about whether or not the groups can trust that any agreement they sign today will be respected by the other side in the future, either because there could be a change in leadership or there could be a change in the balance of power or something like that. And so if that's, in some ways they're linked, but if that's really the core problem, then the message seems to me that you want more foreign intervention. You want a greater international presence to help these two sides credibly commit, and future leaders on both sides to credibly commit by anything they sign today. And it's a plea to have almost national unity governments on both sides around the table. And so you're making this larger argument about aspirations, but I think really what it comes down to is this time inconsistency problem, which is about credible commitments and expectations on whether or not you'll be in a better bargaining position in the future relative than you are right now.
Okay, I'll try to take those three. This is going to be a real test. So maybe I'll end up with a word of hope. So I'll circle back to that. In terms of the relationship to other conflicts, my own view is that there's a specific, I'm going to call it Arab-Israeli dynamic. So I don't know that, Iran has played a role, it's sometimes a destructive role, oftentimes not a very helpful role. Israel has used them as the excuse not to act on the Palestinian front, saying, we have to deal with Iran. But I don't know that has really affected the kind of dynamics we spent an hour and a half discussing. The Arab dynamic is a different one, and part of why we call the book Tomorrow's Yesterday is I think we are back in a place, this will also answer a little bit of your question, where the Arab world is going to play a much bigger role. And let's remember the conflict at its inception is an Arab-Israeli conflict. It's not a Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And as was the case after the Nakba, the Palestinians are leaderless, basically. I think both Hamas and Fatah face real legitimacy issues. And they don't have anyone who could really speak for them. So the Arab world has an opportunity, if they seize it, to step up and to be much more active on their behalf, but with them as well. And that, again, is reminiscent of days past. It didn't work particularly well for the Palestinians back in the 1950s, but maybe now, who knows, the Palestinians could. So I do think it's very much tied into the Arab dynamic. I would hope that if there's an expansion of the Abraham Accords, that there'd be a greater emphasis on the Palestinian component. But anyway, so that there I think I would look at it as a chessboard where the Arab pieces matter a lot. So I'd agree with part of what you said. I don't think, I wouldn't go so far to say that's I don't know if you say the core problem or the main problem, because I think it also is what issues are being discussed, as I said. I think, and that's where I want to come to your issue of national unity governments. So I do think there is an issue of trust, of is things going to be implemented. I am in favor of greater international, ideally more than just American involvement, because of the imbalance of power, because of the concern that you mentioned. But I don't think it's only that. And I think if I look back, some of the issues, if I had to reinvent the peace process, part of the question was the issues that were being addressed. We spent a long time talking about it. Part of the issues is the outside parties. It was just America, and America elbowed everyone out. I think that was, ultimately, it was to the detriment of the US itself. And part of it was who are the Israelis and Palestinians who were invited to the table. And they tended to be, again, this is a self-criticism, we tend to invite those we feel comfortable with. So it's the Israeli peace camp, it's the Palestinian moderates. Those are the ones because they talk like us, they look like us, they act like us. They don't have the most resonance or the most power on the ground. And so if we're going to try to reach something and we exclude some of those most dynamic parts, the Islamists, the refugees, the settlers, the religious constituencies in Israel, yeah, you may have a sort of a nice little peace process, but it's going to be vulnerable to attacks by those who are excited, and it's not really going to speak to some of the core feelings. So, but I would agree, again, with part of what you're saying. I do think it's also a matter of what's going to be on the table and what kind of outcome that people are going to think of. Reason for hope. I'd said earlier, my hope right now is not, my hope, I wish, but I don't believe it, that we're, suddenly Israelis and Palestinians are going to say, oh my God, look at the future. We need a two-state solution and let's go there. But I'm going to leave with, I don't know if it's the end, but with sort of a couple of thoughts. The first is, I do think that there's a false optimism, as we say in the book, in thinking, let's just go back to what didn't work in the past. And it's comforting, and I hear from President Macron to others saying, now we're going to be on an irreversible path to two-state solution. It's the only solution. That's rhetoric. That feels good. It just changes nothing. And in fact, for me, that's the worst kind of optimism, because it's going to lead to greater pessimism in the future when it fails. We've lived with enough of that optimism, and that kind of optimism has been lethal, of always invoking a solution that we never get to, invoking it even as everything was moving in the opposite direction. I mean, for me, some of the most, and I wrote some of these talking points, but some of them were crazy, like talking about a two-state solution when nothing on the ground was moving in that direction, and the US was doing nothing to make it move in that direction. So I think there's true optimism in saying, now's the time to rethink everything. For me, that's more optimistic in a way, to say, let's think more creatively, let's open our horizons, let's think out of the box of what a solution could look like. What I would do, I do think now's the time, and again, it's reminiscent of how what happened between, say, 1960 and the 1980s, courageous Israelis and Palestinians started talking.
Yeah.
And they spoke in ways that were, taboo on both sides. And they started exploring, and they ended up with different answers. They weren't always particularly successful, but I think now is the time for not official discussion. I can't imagine what Netanyahu and Mahmoud Abbas sitting in the same room. That won't give anything. But actors on both sides who are going to try to say, okay, let's put things on the table. And one thing that you and I spoke about before we came out here is what both Hussein and I noticed, Hussein more than I did, is that sometimes the most engaged, productive discussions were between, and I'm going to use a shorthand, hardline Israelis and hardline Palestinians, because they were speaking the same language. It wasn't sort of this language of the peace process. It was, both of us love the entirety of the land. Both of us respect the fact that you love the entirety of the land. We hate that fact. We wish it weren't true. Doesn't mean we're going to get to an outcome, but we get it. You are like us in that you are honest about what you want, and you're not sort of playing games about it. And so I do think that there could be forms of dialogue that are more constructive. And finally, I'd say, and I say this in part because of we're in a university, I do think there's a different mindset among Americans. Not everyone is comfortable with it, but it is a mindset that is saying we need to question both US policy and US apprehension of what the Middle East is about, and what the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is about, and how the US has addressed it. And I hear it with my students. I suspect you hear it with yours. Again, it's not always the most comfortable, and sometimes not even the most productive, but there's compared to when I was a student, with some of the people that I recognize here back at Yale, things that we're hearing, attitudes, dispositions, belief systems, have nothing to do. They would have been considered completely beyond the pale 30 years ago. And so I do think there's a possibility, not that the US is going to switch and now is going to put its thumb on the Palestinian side, but maybe a greater understanding of the relative and the respective narratives of both sides. And over time, maybe that translates not just in terms of campus attitudes, but political attitudes, political decision-making. So if I look for hope, I look at it in terms of, I should mention the first one, which is, I think, if October 7th and what happened afterwards taught either side anything, is that neither side is going away. I mean, if the Palestinians are still in Gaza after what happened, I assume Israelis have to realize they're not going to leave because they're being told to. So that reality exists. They're going to have to find a way to coexist. I hope they do it by having a different kind of conversation, dialogue, include Arab countries, include others in that process, and then maybe a new page will be turned in this country. And this country, as I said, has played at best a neutral role. I would say a destructive one, if I want to be more honest. And so can there be a time where people from this crowd, this generation, are in charge and lead us to a better place?
Well, Rob, we are at the end of our time, but I think you can judge by the questions and certainly by the many questions that I didn't even get to ask that we could go for another 2 hours. At some point in this conversation, in order to get you to like me, I said, we're going to pretend that I'm the student and you're the professor, and now I'm going to give you my course evaluation. We evaluate on a 5-point scale. I'd give you a 6. I don't want to know what grade you'd give me. I hope you will come back. We have a lot more to talk with you. I didn't get to ask you any of my questions about Iran. Everybody, ladies and gentlemen, please join me in thanking Rob Malley.
This has been a presentation of the Middle East Initiative at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government. If you enjoyed this conversation, please consider sharing it, clicking like, and subscribing to our YouTube channel, where you can find other installments in this series of Middle East Dialogues. To learn more about Harvard's Middle East Initiative and what we're doing to promote open inquiry on the region, please visit our website at hks.harvard.edu/Middle East. Thanks to the Kennedy School and the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs, and thank you for watching.